to you?
Yes. All right, so I'm convinced that Ayn Rand was a good heroine for economic libertarian. Now, what about the social side? I mean, would she be against helmet laws? Was she pro-choice? Where was she on social issues?
She was pro-choice, unabashedly. She came out very early. Only twice did she urge her followers to do anything political. The first was in 1964 to register as Republicans so they could vote in the primary for Goldwater. That was one. And the second was to write to the New York State Legislature in 1979 when it was legalizing, I think it might have been 69, when it was legalizing its abortion laws. It was the first state to consider doing that. So these are the two instances where she, says, go do something. And her view was very simply that an embryo had no personhood, and it really was about the mother. So she made a number of very homophobic comments. She didn't like homosexuality, but she would say, it's none of my business. So I think she would definitely come out on the socially liberal side. She tended to be a little bit culturally conservative. This is a woman born in Russia in 1905. She had those cultural prejudices. But she was phasing out of public life in the 70s when these issues really came to the fore. She was not in good health. She was not engaging these questions. But I think we can extrapolate and put her. The one thing I question is, where would she come out on gay marriage? She might say the state shouldn't even really be involved in this relationship in the first place. But I believe she would say because it is involved, everyone has to be treated equally. We can't make these distinctions.
California libertarian, not a Midwestern.
Yeah, I think so. Okay, a lot of questions. I'll start there with you, sir.
I want to comment on your characterization of people on campus in the 60s. So I was in college from 66 to 70 in New York City.
Uh-huh. What college, can I ask? Where was it?
College.
Brooklyn, okay.
And had a lot of friends who were objectivists.
I'm sure you did.
They wore the gold money sign
Mm-hmm.
around their neck. But they would not. Yeah, they were. But they would not. I don't think they would characterize themselves as conservative at the time. I mean, my sense was that we were all. The rest of us were lefties, but they were doing something else in terms of their own identity that they found very powerful in Rand.
Yeah.
I think Brandon came to campus. I mean, it was really all over the campus. But so I just would say, I don't think they would have called themselves conservative. We could look back and maybe say they were.
Yeah.
But at the time, my friends wouldn't have said that. They were
Yeah. For sure. It's difficult, and I walk a tough tightrope here because I want to, people like that are definitely objectivists, they're definitely libertarians. When we start, going up higher and getting a 30,000 degree view, we start seeing this as part of a more conservative pattern, at least in economics and government policy. But yeah, there's a lot of what we say more liberal or more progressive elements to it. Now, Brooklyn College had, a lot of, I've seen they had Committee to Defend Free Enterprise. They did rallies against SDS. They'd go over to Columbia and rally against SDS, in suit and tie, And so that was definitely a hotbed of it. And so in my work, I'm on the one hand pointing out the uniqueness of libertarianism and objectivism, and the other showing there's a permeable barrier between that and the conservative movement. Plenty of conservatives would read Rand not buy her wholesale because, hey, I'm a Catholic, and that's really important to me. So I'm going to stay more in the YAF National Review crowd. But yes.
Two comments. One, what's her relationship with Hayek, the great Austrian libertarian thinker? But secondly, to build on Warren's comment, it seems to me that conservatives were always deeply clear, much more than liberals were with their extreme left, flirting with Stalinism and Marxism and whatever. But let's give Chambers and Buckley credit here.
They were more clear on what?
They were absolutely clear that they would not tolerate and honor her, that they had no sympathy with her, and that they absolutely did everything they possibly could to cut her off. That she and I just wonder about your own sense of her career, because when Chambers writes that initial review that was endorsed by Buckley, does that begin a kind of withdrawal to her collectives, to her own kind of inner circle? Because, there was an emergence of modern conservatism, and it was intentionally anti-libertarian, anti-Ayn Rand. And there was as much effort as possible. And I loved your book, by the way, and I'd recommend it to anybody. But it does seem to me that you talk about her as a gateway to the right. You try to talk about her as a potential influence on the right. I mean, everything Christian conservatives have ever done, they couldn't be louder and clearer to say no to on-ramp.
So I'll just start with that one. They couldn't be clearer, but that doesn't mean people were listening. You know, and this is why you get these repeated, the argument gets repeated over and over and over again. Because Rand has this magnetic attraction for the young, you know, and for anyone really discovering this world, it's not just young people who are reading her right now. And so then they have to work out where she fits. And I think there was a process of co-optation where her ideas were neutralized or changed. And that's by now it's certainly happened. You don't hear anything about her religious beliefs. As for her relationship with Hayek, they never met. Hayek said, her novels were great, but I couldn't stand those speeches. He would just, as soon as the speech started, he would just page forward to the rest of it. And so he had sort of a benign view of her, but she hated him because she thought that he was a compromiser and that he left a role for the state. And, you know, Hayek is sometimes thought of as this sort of fountainhead of conservatism, and the left thinks he's like this demonic Austrian. Well, you know, he said there's a role for welfare provision in a free society that's compatible with a free society, and that to her was the opening of coercive powers of government. So let me just ask someone who hasn't. Yeah, Sam.
So on the principles of objectivism that you laid out, it seems like there's a particular dissonance between the first one on the idea of sort of the belief in objective reality, this kind of sort of almost metaphysical realism that exists, and the third, that is a sort of belief in individualism or selfishness. In other words, that insofar as one believes in the third and the ability of the individual to be selfish, it seems to sort of erode at the first that one is held accountable, in other words, the self is held accountable to the objective reality of the world. And so there seems to be this particular phenomenological dissonance between 1 and 3. And so my sense about Rand, which I'll admit clearly that I never took her up in high school, mostly on the basis that I just thought she was a very poor metaphysician, on this very basis. So, I mean, could you offer any sort of clarification of the extent to which Rand might have acknowledged or ignored this particular dissonance within objectivism?
She really saw it as a unified system, and you started with, okay, there's objective reality and you can't escape it. And how does man survive in objective reality? Through his own brain, through his own individual effort. Therefore, you always need to use reason. Therefore, you need to protect yourself by use of your reason. You need to be focused on your own survival. What didn't come in was, well, maybe, you know, now we're going back to the state of nature, right? Maybe a bunch of men banded together in cooperative action to survive. You know, another philosopher could go steps 1, 2, and then 3 be like, therefore, cooperation is necessary, and a lot of people do. She just didn't focus on cooperation and connection. She focused more on what individuals did for themselves, to the extent of, you know, she argued earlier in her career in some unpublished stuff I was looking at, you know, all birth is individual. You know, it's like, okay, well, biologically, no. You know, there's 2 people involved in a birthing process. So I don't know. Is that getting towards what you're saying?
It seems like a fatal flaw of objectivism in my mind, that insofar as one wants to argue that the world is the case, one cannot then sort of undercut that world by saying that an individual can selfishly sort of determine the basis for that world that is in advance already the case. I mean, it seems a fairly clear contradiction. And so, in my mind, that in and of itself is a reason to sort of completely dismiss Rand on purely metaphysical grounds.
Yeah, and she hasn't penetrated deeply into the world of professional philosophy for reasons of that and others. You know, she doesn't write like a philosopher, she doesn't talk like a philosopher. We really look at her more in an older traditional philosophy that talked about the meaning of life to a broader audience. Yeah. I meant not in terms of 20th century academic philosophy. I mean, she's miles apart from that. And she wanted to be miles apart from that. Yes?
What do you think Ayn Rand would have to say about economic events in the recent years in the U.S., specifically like the subprime mortgage crisis and with the government bailing out banks?
I'm pretty confident that she would say what she said, repeatedly throughout her career was, we don't have a capitalist system. We have a mixed system, and she'd point to subprime, or she'd point to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac as evidence. We don't have a free market in housing loans. There's government subsidies that are distorting the market. No wonder it crashed. What she would say about predatory lending, I'm not so sure. I don't know that she would even accept that as a valid analytic concept. She tended to take the caveat emptor, buyer beware. If you sign up for a mortgage you can't afford, that's your fault. If you sign up for a mortgage you can't afford because the agent lied about the paperwork, that scenario doesn't tend to unfold in her novels. It might be the government bureaucrat lying about the paperwork, but not the not the sales guy. So there's a bit of a she didn't wrestle too much with unethical people getting in the system and subverting it, but she'd have a very clear answer to the government interventions in the market and say they were a disaster from the beginning, and chickens are coming home to roost, that type of thing.